Welcome to BNEWS Weekly Special Report. I'm very pleased to have today as our guest Bill Cummings, who's the chairman of the Cummings Foundation. I think he's still chairman of Cummings Properties, and all-around entrepreneur and philanthropist. We're going to talk about a variety of things, beginning today with his book, which is Starting Small and Making It Big. And it's an entrepreneur's journey to a billion-dollar philanthropist. Which very few of us knew, actually, that Bill was a billionaire. So Bill Cummings like to out yourself, but let's start from the very beginning. Born in 1937 to Dot and Gus. You had a sister, Marion, who was, I think, 7 years older. So you're not really familiar with the Depression, born in 37, but Marion was 7 years older. So she was able to tell you some of the stories of the change in lifestyle, things that happened in the community and in the country as a whole. What were some of the things that she imparted to you, and what were the things that stuck with you your lifetime as a result of that?
Well, I certainly do recall some of those things, and to this day, I attribute a whole lot to the fact that I was born then, even beyond what I might remember. That was frugality. My parents were absolutely devoted to it, and from a very early age, there was penny saved as a penny earned, and I didn't upgrade to a dollar saved as a dollar earned until 30 years later, probably. My sister used to, in those days, we lived near the railroad track over on Boston Avenue, and just off Boston Avenue in Medford Hillside, and her thing was going down to the railroad track every morning to pick up coal that fell from the trains. Eventually, there was one particular an engineer, who came through, and she used to tell me how he would accidentally spill a shovel full of coal.
Missed a firebox by accident?
Yeah, and she'd pick that up afterwards, and my mother would talk about how good she got at finding coal. And there was a secret there, though.
Yeah.
But the stories I heard from her were the friends who were suddenly in a much different category that had been affluent before. That affluence wasn't there anymore.
Now, you were now a youngster still, middle school, before actually when the war broke out, so you're now subject to the rationing program. Your father's working at the shipyard. What were those times like?
I was more like 5 when the war broke out, and I'm born in 37, and my dad commuted from Medford to Fall River Shipyard in Quincy, and had a long drive every day. There were no highways that went to Quincy. He went through the city of Boston, but that made the difference in our lifestyle. During the war, from the Depression, they were pretty destitute, as people weren't paying money to have their houses painted. They didn't have any disposable income, but the war broke the Depression for most people at that time.
But even in those days, as a youngster, you were filled with the idea of maybe carrying some of the weight yourself. Your first entrepreneurial effort was selling soda. Actually, a pretty astute businessman. I think you bought it for a nickel and sold it for a dime. How did that work out?
That worked out pretty well. And it would happen to be a big construction project, rebuilding Route 28, the Fells Way down. We lived right at the corner of Salem Street and the Fells Way, what used to be the car barns, and more recently was across the street from Johnny's Food Master. There's an old wooden apartment house that's still there, and my parents slept in the living room. My sister and I slept in the one bedroom. Worked out just fine, and I had very much a comfortable, happy childhood. I was never hungry, but it was only because we had inexpensive accommodations and grew up that way.
Now, you graduated from there to ice cream. Ice cream to the construction site? Was that to the car barn and the?
No, neither. I for several years found that I could make more money peddling ice cream off my bicycle, and I rode down through Medford Square, down Mystic Avenue to a company that was down there, an ice cream manufacturer where I'd buy chocolate covers and sundae cups and ice cream sandwiches. And I took it mostly over to the Ford Motor Plant, where Assembly Mall is today.
Right.
And I tell the story about people thinking I must have been one of the manager's sons, and I let them think that.
Didn't abuse them of that notion. No?
I did not. And I'd get inside the gate as they were breaking at the end of the day. But I also passed ice cream in through the windows along the assembly line. So I know exactly what all the cars looked like for several years.
Now the manager must have had a pretty good idea of how good you were at it, since I think he constructed a little refrigeration unit for you, didn't he, on your wagon?
No, I bought those.
Yeah.
I bought something, and I also bought a freezer over at Sears and Roebuck, so I could start out with ice cream and pedal it down Mystic Avenue on the way down. Whatever I had left from the previous day, would stick it in my freezer at home. And there I was at Ford at about 3 o'clock. Excuse me. And I made more money, Phil, selling ice cream than I ever could have made working for anybody after school.
Sure.
And I haven't been affected by peer pressure very much in my life, but I think the fact in those days, if I was going into high school, I was going to get laughed at for riding my bike.
Right. Well, so you shifted gears. You stayed in the ice cream business, though, and you went to work for Brigham's for a number of years, actually, while you were matriculated at Tufts. We can talk about that as well.
I had a great time working for Brigham's. I worked in probably 28 or 29 of their 40 or 45 stores. In my last couple of years, while I was at Tufts, I was a summertime manager. And that worked out really nicely.
So how did that contribute to your overall management skills prior to entering business school?
It made quite a difference, and I never went to business school, by the way. I tried. Harvard wouldn't take me.
Okay. You went to Tufts, and you had a liberal arts degree.
A liberal arts degree, economics.
So ice cream served you well during your later years as you matriculated through Tufts, getting a degree in economics. You worked for Brigham's. How did that work out in terms of your management experience and your business experience? How did that contribute to Bill Cummings later?
Well, aside from learning to scoop ice cream and make 3 ice cream sodas in my hand at the same time, there were far better advantages in terms of working with people. Very often, I worked as a summer replacement manager, and I was the kid that would come in during the manager's vacation period for a week or two, and very interesting. I'd be oftentimes working with my peers, or I'd be working with people who were 50 years older than I was, and who owned the stores, they thought, and it gave me some good experience personnel-wise, and working with people and trying to get them to do what we all could agree was the right way to do things, and it worked out pretty well. It was a great experience.
Now, I want to harken back a little bit to your earlier years. I missed one question on your entrepreneurial spirit. During Hurricane Carol, which was in '56, okay, so you are 9 years old at the time, right? Is it 56?
No.
Or when was Carol? No, you were 19. 13, 16.
I was getting up there.
Yeah, right. And you're working with your father.
It was probably 54.
Was it 54?
I think so.
Yeah, it must have been 54. Okay.
I'm getting younger and younger. But
yeah,
not,
well,
but not
I
9.
remember. I remember it. Just I think I was 4 or 5 at the time. Okay, so now that we've got the time frame correct, you're a risk taker, but this was quite a risk. You're out in the middle of Hurricane Carol down at the docks, and you see a boat go down. Take us the story from there.
I happened to know the boat, and it was at a public landing on the Charles River, and I saw this 30-foot Garwood speedboat, to a 2-cockpit open mahogany boat.
Beautiful
and it got
boat.
swamped rather than bashed against the wall, and it filled with water before it hit the wall. I knew right where it was. I called the owner. I said, I know where your boat is. I can get it up. We made a deal, and I think it was $500 that I was going to get.
That was a big amount of money in those days.
It was a lot of money since I was able to get it up in a matter of hours on one day. I rented a couple of big heavy-duty airbags, and it was a wooden boat. It had a 12-cylinder Scripps engine in it. It was an aircraft engine.
Aircraft, sure, yeah.
But there was enough wood in the boat that it went down softly.
Right.
And it was just mud on the bottom.
And it went stern end because of or midships, right? Where was the engine?
The engine was happened to be in the center between the two cockpits.
Okay.
So it went down just straight up, just went down very nicely, and it didn't take much to offset the difference. The airbag pulled it up to the surface. I pulled it over to the wall.
Bailed her out?
Bailed it out.
It made $500.
Yeah, and made 500. He was happy to pay it.
Right.
And it worked out very nicely. It was mostly fresh water down the Charles inside the locks.
So they were, and it hadn't been submerged too long, so the
No.
damage to the engine wasn't that great.
Very, very slight.
Okay, well let's go back in the adult world here.
And I even got a ride in that boat on the open sea after he got it going.
Later.
He called me. He said, "You've seen it for years."
That's how
So I
thankful he was.
did know it.
Well, that was an expensive boat in those days, certainly.
Yeah.
All mahogany, good
Yeah.
Lord.
Yep.
So you're at Tufts and you get recruited by Vicks Chemical, which was the maker of Vicks Vapor Rub, I guess, at the time,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
Recruited right out of college. What was that experience like? You eventually went into management from there, or sales management at least, right?
Yeah, I happened to be graduating in one of those years, such as 2018. Right now, it's a great year to graduate from high school or college. Lots of jobs around.
Right.
And there were in 1958 when I graduated as well. So I had several offers that I could look at. And I think Vicks was probably the lowest paying job by quite a bit. I think it was $400 even a month was the starting salary. But I was going to be traveling all over the country. I started with Vicks, and I started with them probably about June 28th or something like that. And it was December 23rd when I got back to Boston. It was the first time I hadn't stayed in a hotel that whole time.
Really?
So it was all but 6 full months on the road. And here I am, a 21-year-old kid, company expense account, company car, traveling everywhere. It was a marvelous experience.
Vicks also had a nationally noted sales training and management program, did they not?
Vicks did. That was the big part of the appeal. It was a difficult program to get into. I didn't know it at the time, but Jack Kerouac had completed the same program, and he was on the road for Vicks Chemical Company, and hence the name of his book. They speculate it was my time on the road. He talked about his experience in that book of being on the road. So everybody knew him in 1958, and it was a good reason why people wanted to work there. But again, I didn't know it at the time, but I certainly became familiar with the lure of working in the same job that Kerouac had.
Yeah. So you visited somewhere in the order of 40, 45 states?
With them, I was a few less than that. It was in the high 30s, though.
High 30s. Okay, so now you get recruited by Gorton's of Gloucester.
I happened to be out in California, and a good friend of mine, fraternity brother from Tufts, called me and said, "I got a place you ought to go. They need somebody to market a new product." And I knew nothing about fish. I knew less about fertilizer, and even less about horticultural issues.
So this is Mermaid, is that what it's the
Mermaid fish emulsion fertilizer.
Mermaid fish emulsion
And
fertilizer.
Gorton's was into that product as a way to use byproducts, not so much for itself, but for the industry in Gloucester.
Right, to hire more people and
Find a good product for what otherwise would be waste.
right.
There was a surplus of it there, and they wanted to build that business, and they did for a while. Then they sold it. I got into the main. I went to work selling dead fish after that. But it worked out very
Well,
well.
that worked out fine, except...
Went from smelly vapor up to smelly fish.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I thought the interesting thing was at the shows, people were opening the can or the jar and smelling it, and it smelled like fish. And then you, I think, and your compatriot devised a scheme to soak the caps in vanilla.
Yeah, the little insert inside each cap would unscrew it. We had them soaked overnight in vanilla extract, and people smell. Oh, this smells good. It didn't matter because once it was mixed with water
As an emulsion,
and
there was
applied
no
to
smell.
and applied to the
Sure.
plants,
Sure.
the smell was not an issue at all. But we don't always make our judgments on what we buy on sound information.
Right.
So that worked
Now,
out very
here's
well.
Gorton brings up a huge turning point, inflection point, whatever we want to call it in terms of a life's journey, but you miss out on a job. Explain to us what happened there.
I took considerable exception to being passed over strictly because of my age at a job, which the management maybe, it might have been better if they lied to me, but they told me they fully believed that I was the best candidate to fill a position.
You were the top producer.
In that manner and in sales and other ways. But there was somebody there I happened to like who was going to get the job because he was a parent and a father, and he'd been there for a long time, and he needed the promotion, and a reasonable enough decision for a company to make. But that was enough to have me say it's time for me to go somewhere else. I need to work on my own.
But also made a mark for you in terms of your later career as to relations with employees and how to treat them and based on merit and things of that sort.
It had a lot to do with other decisions that I made and have made ever since. It helped me that it happened. I never have started in business myself. Perhaps I might have stayed in corporate America. I liked it. I was doing well. I was given all kinds of incentive to stay, notwithstanding that. But the message was there, and I wasn't willing to wait.
Okay, so you go on a 4-month sojourn after that, I guess, to find yourself. I don't know what we would call it, or you just had some extra time on your hands and a couple of bucks and you thought you'd do a little touring of the world.
I did exactly that and had a marvelous time with the rail pass all through Europe, and I slept on a lot of Trans-European Express trains that provided very nice accommodations for free and good meals while I was there for free, and had a great time. Probably hit 25 different countries through Europe and North Africa and the Near East.
Right.
All of that many anyway.
Wonderful. For an experience of what now at this point you're 26 years old?
I would have been about that, probably 27, I guess.
Right. Right. And how about Cunard? You're on Cunard. You also had a book on how to how to travel on Cunard lines.
Well, even before the internet, there were underground publications, and that was how do you. I talk a little bit in the book about upgrading without benefit of company knowledge, and managed to get myself very nicely into first class, and not commute back downstairs to my bunk.
Well, you had a bridge partner too. I understand you won on board.
I did have a good bridge partner who was easily at the time would have been 40 years my senior, and she thought it would be nice to get to play with. We'd play together. I dined with her and her friend in the first class section. And
well, that was only because you were playing winning hands. Right? It's always good to have a good partner. They can help.
And we won. And I don't know what we won, but we got a nice, very nice little plaque.
Right.
I've got a lot of other plaques on the wall here,
Yeah,
but
right.
I don't think that one didn't
That
survive.
didn't make it. Well, this is a pretty august collection, so perhaps a little bridge tournament didn't make it.
That's one of the best ones. This is bungee jumping in New
Oh,
Zealand.
yes, I read that. New Zealand,
Yeah,
yes. Patty went before you, right?
Yeah, my daughter Patty jumped first, and then I had to go.
Yeah, well, yeah, you couldn't let your daughter show you up. How good would that be?
Another one is just a couple of years ago at Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe. on the Zambezi River.
Oh, good Lord.
And if you look,
A lot of big reptiles in the Zambezi.
well, there are that. They had a herd of elephants went over earlier that summer. They got into the water at the wrong spot. I was in at the right spot, a place called Devil's Pool. And the guide is standing up behind 3 of us there, and it's 1,000 feet straight down from where
Yes,
he's standing. And he's
right.
standing there barefoot in the water.
Well, now you're in your 70s here, your mid-70s in this picture, and you're in your early 60s in that picture. That's a little bit more than entrepreneurial risk-taking, don't you think?
Though I think of myself as pretty conservative in most things, and at the same time I did do that. I spent time, at one point I describe in the book, going down in a deep coal mine in Clymer, Pennsylvania, the Imperial Coal Mine there.
Yeah. You couldn't get me in one of those things on a bet.
Went down on a conveyor belt, flat down, and bust my head open if I raised my head,
Oh, yeah.
if I forgot.
Oh, gee.
I did some deep water diving, helmet diving in the Adriatic Sea on another occasion.
Helmet diving, a full suit with the helmet?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and that with no experience.
Oh, my goodness.
And quite a bit of scuba diving also. I was well qualified for that. But
Well, and you've done some pretty extensive skiing, too, from some... you've skied in the Alps, haven't you?
yeah, I've skied quite a few places, but that skiing, I wouldn't claim to be a great skier at all. I'm not, and not now for sure, and was never great, but had a good time with it.
Well,
You know,
that
the
4 months seemed to serve you well.
Same as golf, by the way. Played a lot,
Yeah.
played a lot of golf, and never did well at it.
Yeah, me too.
Had a good time, though.
Yeah, I've played a lot of golf and never become. It's a lot like the guitar. I've played 40 years of guitar and never mastered that either.
Okay.
So after 4 months in this world sojourn here, you come back to town, and Gus has a suggestion for you. Your father has a suggestion. Why don't you go down and see Simonson? What was the father? The owner's name was Llewellyn. He was
Llewellyn Farnsworth,
Farnsworth, but Simonson was the name of the company, right?
The name of the company was Simonson. It was named after Wilmot Horatio Simonson.
Wilmot, that's right.
Wilmot Simonson, and he bought the company from a successor to the old Medford Rum Company.
And this is the Medford Juice Company, the old Medford Juice.
Old Medford Fruit Punch Company.
Fruit Punch Company, that's right.
That was the colloquial name. The real name, that was a corporation with the name Wilmot Simonson Company. And I looked at it and thought about it, and in the course of
Well,
3
Gus
hours,
says to you, why don't you go down and see this fellow? There's a fruit punch company, and you, having absolutely no experience in fruit punch, thought you'd go down there and have a look.
he wanted to sell it right away, and he wanted $40,000 for it, and that was, he explained why it was, where he got that number. He felt it was really worth about 85, but he knew I couldn't afford that much, so he'd sell it for 40,000. We worked through the afternoon, and
Well, let's set the stage now. He's asking 40,000, and he's doing annual sales somewhere in the order of 12,000, correct?
it was a 110 or 12-year-old company at that time.
Right.
Sales were reduced to $12,000. That's all there was.
So he had visions of grandeur at $40,000.
Yeah, indeed. He had a bunch of old equipment and corporate licenses, and a corporate entity itself is worth something.
Sure.
And we decided, and I finally convinced him that $4,000 was the right amount.
Sure.
The most I could make in the business might have been about 50 cents an hour. If I paid him more than that.
Based on what he was doing with the business,
Yeah.
certainly. Yeah. So this is really a remarkable story. So you buy this for $4,000, and this is in 1964. Okay, so you're 26 years old. 26 years old. You sell it in 1970, 7 years later, for $1 million, $980,000.
Just under $1 million.
In 7 years.
Yeah.
And you went from $10,000 a year in sales to, what did you cap out in today's dollars, roughly $5 million a year?
Oh, in today's dollars probably, But we made a lot of money.
Really?
We're selling fruit punch. It got down to finding a new way to get fruit punch into the cafeteria, dining, and serving lines, and in the dining rooms at colleges.
Well, it was quite ingenious. I mean, the way that you did it. I mean, you had the milk company, I guess, distribute it, and then you had it in a couple of dining halls, but you were just bringing over. They were just bringing over jugs, and you introduced the dispenser. That was the key to it, was it not?
Yeah, Phil, exactly. It was the key to it. And the most important part is that 2 of the 24 accounts in total that we had at the time when we bought the business, most of the accounts were catering firms who'd use it for their weddings and their bar mitzvahs and their parties of all sorts. And the colleges also used it for afternoon teas and faculty events. They'd serve a tray of cookies and coffee and brownies and Old Medford fruit punch. But those 2 accounts, one of them was Harvard and one was MIT. And it was the
Not bad banners, right?
yeah. It was at MIT. It was the Walker Memorial Dining Hall, and at Harvard it was the Law School Dining Hall. And we got those 2 accounts to finally put it in their dining room for the students. It had never been out to the students. They had to have an appropriate dispenser. We tell the story about buying an oversized dispenser. They stood about yay high off the floor, but they were on a table. It held 14 gallons. It wasn't practical to put a crystal bowl and a ladle out there. This worked out beautifully.
Right. So it solved a couple of problems for you. It was able to dispense en masse, and they were able to make their mix right there from your concentrate.
Exactly. And we went from college to college to college, and eventually we're selling 325 or 30 colleges. Right. And all the other business we did might have been, it would be a few hospitals. That's where I met Joyce. I met Joyce at Massachusetts Iron Ear Infirmary.
Don't spoil that yet.
Oh, okay. All right,
so let's continue on. So now you're still here in Medford, and well, we're in Woburn today, but the company is in Medford, and now you go to Henson Street, and your output, within 2 years of acquiring the company, your output goes from 5,000 cases to capability of 210,000 cases on an annual basis?
Well, the sales coming in might have been more like 50 cases. Really? That was the volume.
Really?
And then we got this, we eventually greatly outgrew the business that we had on a location we had on Fulton Street in Medford, and moved to Henshaw Street in Woburn, down at the corner of Washington Street and Montvale Avenue.
Right, number 10, right?
Number 10 Henshaw Street.
Right.
And suddenly we were in the big leagues as far as small companies are concerned.
Right. And then now let's go to finding Joyce. You're making calls in one of the hospitals. She's in the dietitian's department, right?
Joyce was the hospital dietitian at Massachusetts Iron Ear Infirmary.
Right, right.
And notwithstanding what we know today about sugar drinks,
Right.
we didn't know that much in those days, and they had a cafeteria like everybody else.
Right.
She started ordering Old Medford fruit punch to put into the cafeteria dining hall, and did a nice business for us, and smiled at me just right when I'd come in, and we suddenly struck up a relationship, and a year later we were married.
So it was love at first sight.
Yeah, that was 50, almost 52 years ago. 52
years ago. So let's do that tangent now and tell me how important it is for an entrepreneur, a successful man, to have a partner, a strong partner who contributes in those ways.
Oh, that's a toughie. I'll have to tell you that I was, by the time that I got around to thinking of getting married, I was 29 when I got married, and Joyce was 26, I think. But there wasn't any time to think about marriage before that time, and I hadn't met Joyce, of course, either.
Right.
But so I was able to sustain myself alone, and the secret is finding someone who will buy into the fact that if you're going to operate a business and own it, it's not a 9-to-5 job. It's not, I'll work short time because everybody else, I'll pay them extra. They'll work all the hours. It doesn't go that way. If people want to be in a small company, a startup company, the owner better be there. The owner better really care and motivate people with his or her own example. And that was my theory anyway.
And you had 4 children, so she's busy on the home front, and then she's also busy in the community as a volunteer in a couple of different organizations.
Joyce was quite busy, even including being a trustee at Mass Eye and Ear Infirmary in much later years.
Right.
And she's been quite active in a lot of things, and she was I had some roles in the community. My most interesting one was probably serving as a member and chairman of the planning board in Winchester. And seeing that from the other side of the table from where the developer normally would be. So I particularly liked that role.
Right, sure.
And as you say, Joyce was mom and dad a lot of the times for a lot of the kids' things. And I wasn't available to do the coaching that dads like to do and that type of thing.
Well, we'll talk about the philanthropic aspects of your career in a little while, but this effort of philanthropy goes way back. I mean, you and Joyce, when you were successful in business, she was involved with you in instituting a family 10% rule. Tell us about that.
From the very earliest days of Old Medford Foods, at least the earliest days when we got to Woburn, our approach was that 10% of all of the income of the company would go to philanthropy. And we concentrated locally at first. That gave us an especially strong relationship with the Boys and Girls Club here in Woburn. The Boys Club, excuse me. The
Boys Club.
Boys Club in those days.
Boys and Girls in 1992, I think. Right?
Okay. And eventually we determined that we would put those funds aside, and eventually in '86 we founded Cummings Foundation that managed the funds, and we gradually built that up.
Okay, well, that's on my second page. So let's go back and let's talk about the sale of the fruit juice company. Really launched Bill Cummings in the real estate business. So you're a fruit juice guy, okay, and now you suddenly begin on this path of real estate mogul, and that happened with the lease back of the Henson property to the acquirer of the fruit juice company. But it also led you to the importance of future buildability. So tell us what happened with the Henson Street property.
It's Henshaw.
Henshaw.
Yeah.
Henshaw. Yeah.
The property, the most significant thing there was a 1 acre lot with a 14,000 foot building on it, which was occupied primarily by Old Medford Foods, or entirely, I guess, at that point. And there was room for another building. And without buying any more property and still having the infrastructure in place of the water, sewer, electric, all was coming into the building rather nicely. The streets were there, the driveways were there.
Right.
We put another building on the site and rented it out, 2-story building, had 2 7,500 foot clients, worked out nicely. We bought some land up the street next door because it was there. Decided we did it once, maybe we can do it a little more substantially next door, and we built what I guess ended up as about a 70,000 square foot building. Rented that out, and decided the time had come that maybe it was time to go into the real estate business.
Certainly. So let's talk about future buildability. In your book, you talk about 21 properties that had future ability or something about the purchase unrecognized. Tell us about that.
We soon came to realize that anytime we could buy a property that was priced based on the income, on its income, if we were buying whatever it might be, an existing building, and there was room for more space, that was hugely profitable later on.
Sure, so you reduce your per square foot acquisition cost of the new building.
The new building had no land cost whatsoever. And it was so consistent, it just became a pattern. And looking back on it now, we've been doing this thing for 45, 50 years. And all the way through, we've had opportunities like that where nobody really valued the extra land. Anyone who wants to make an investment in real estate and has thoughts of building it up and improving it can do so well if there's room to add on. And very often, adding another building or pieces of a building to an existing property make the existing property better because you effectively put a new front on it, carry it out 50 feet toward the street maybe, and the whole thing looks like a brand new building. You've got a new face, and the value of the rest of the building goes up, as well as the fact that you've built a large amount of additional space with no land cost.
Well, Place Lane was kind of like that, wasn't it? That was your first entry into the residential area.
Now, Phil, Place Lane was different because there was nothing on the Place Lane property.
Right, but
that was a 9-acre site that was deemed to be unusable for very much because it had just a minimum amount of frontage.
Right, but that was unrecognized availability, was it?
It was unrecognized. It really was unrecognized to a fault of someone's that should have recognized it. Right. That was just in the extreme.
To an opinion. Yeah.
You know, we bought the Place Lane property for very, very short money, and didn't know what we were going to do with it. We determined that eventually the best site wasn't for an office building. Although at one point we planned to buy it, build an office building there. It was zoned, it would have taken it, and determined that there was a great market at that time for residential properties, indeed condominiums. So we built Place Lane condominium, and we had a lot of resistance. The change in the neighborhood, what it was going to do, and how bad it was going to be. The traffic on Main Street would be all tied up. And there were a couple of vocal people who were determined we weren't going to build it, and we did eventually. And it's worked out very well. And I don't think anyone who lives there has ever
had a complaint. Sure, it's a beautiful property.
They've never waited at the corner to get out on the Main Street yet.
Right.
Probably just
well, you know,
happen.
Let me diverge for a moment. And one of your philosophies is about the quality of your property, not necessarily whether it's ostentatious or not, but its cleanliness, its appearance. How does that fit in your philosophy in terms of your clients, appreciating your clients that way?
We've used the phrase plain vanilla. In those days, they were plain vanilla buildings, and value something that people would go there because it was good value, in convenient location, and they were well maintained. And even today, we mentioned the foundation. All those buildings the large majority of our buildings have been donated to the foundation. So we're working at trying to keep the buildings filled as fiduciary responsibility to the foundation. And everything we do today goes to the benefit of the foundation.
Now, over the years, you've demonstrated kind of a unique ability to find these people that fit your management style, that match your ethics, etc. The Boys and Girls Club, or the Boys Club, seemed to be a source of people that you've put on. I think George Holland, certainly Jamie McEwen, Kevin Gardner. Tell us about that relationship.
We developed a relationship, as I mentioned earlier, at a very early state, and I served as a director and now an honorary director, I think, for 30 or 40 years, a long time, and stayed active in it, along with quite a few other things. Here in Woburn at the time, it was in the board of Winchester Hospital and Choate at the same time, actually, for a while. Choate Memorial Hospital, and on the board at Tanner's Bank, but the relationship still oftentimes involved the Boys Club. Charlie Gardner was the director, as you know, for decades.
Sure.
He introduced us to a young man from Woburn who had just completed his active duty with the Marine Corps, and that was George Holland. I hired George on the spot when he came over with Charlie to this office, and sitting right about here probably, and George has been with us ever since. He's
48 years.
He's well over 40 years now.
Yeah.
And he's just done wonders for us. A couple of years or a year and a half later, Charlie introduced me to Jamie McEwen, who had graduated from Woburn High School, went to Salem State University, got a master's degree in school administration at the University of Vermont. In that year, unlike 1958, when I graduated before, as I mentioned to you, that year nobody wanted school teachers.
Right.
There were those times. And I convinced him that, yes, we'd love to have him. And forget all you ever knew about teaching school, except how to work with people. And I don't care what your experience is, we'd love to have you. A year or two after that, Charlie brought his son over, Kevin Gardner, and who had determined he didn't want to go to college, was going to take a couple of years to look around and wanted to work for a while. Love to have Kevin. And he's still here. He's on this floor. He's been here ever since. Does a great job, and it's been a great source of people.
Early on, you identified. Now, Jamie was the boy of the year. He almost 11 years in advance. You identified him as a potential successor, as the president of the company. How does that come about and then actually come to fruition? 11 years later, you go up to chairman of the board and he becomes president of the company.
Well, you referenced earlier, you hire the person, not the resume. And we certainly did that there. And the fact that he was local, we've always tried to hire more local people. If that becomes an asset to the individual, don't have to have a long commute, and they value their position more because they're right there, they're home, and they know what's going on in the community. And it certainly worked that way with George and Jamie and Kevin, and it's proven to be a strong policy of the company. That's one of the things the book does. We talk about business ideas and business philosophy and entrepreneurship.
Right. Well, this is more than a biography. This is a business book. This is a business school.
This is a business book masquerading as an autobiography. I wrote every bit of it and had that in mind the whole time.
Right. I noticed that as an autobiography, there's no ghost credits, there's no editorial credits. This is essentially the words of Bill Cummings put on paper.
Yeah, very much so.
So now we come to another huge inflection point. You're encountering some negativity within the surrounding community over a couple of different projects. You're getting raked over the coals on occasion in the local newspaper, who finds that it sells papers if they make Bill Cummings a pinata. So you go into the newspaper business.
Yeah, it's almost the way it felt anyway.
So tell us about the Woburn Advocate.
We started the Woburn Advocate in an office a lot smaller than the one we're in right here now, and probably a 12 by 12 office. We had the very first employee there was a kid at the time named Neil Swidey.
We brought him over from the Globe, right?
No. He just graduated from Tufts.
Oh, okay.
Neil Swidey at the time had never had a full-time job in writing. And he indeed is now with the Globe. He's a feature writer in the Globe magazine. But he helped me start off the newspaper. And he was the first and second and third employee probably. He worked 60, 70 hours a week getting that paper out. And hired another group. David Harvey was the other early one from Woburn. And quite a group. And I could mention a lot of names that you'd know and remember.
Sure. Well, then you do the Stoneham paper. You did a third paper. In the meantime, Jamie's ascended to the presidency. You're running the newspaper. Dennis Clark comes on board. You identify him as a potential successor. And then while you're off doing this, Jamie identifies probably the big time, entering the big time. The 1.5 million square foot United Shoe Machine building in Beverly, which in 1980 was on the market for $80 million.
Yep.
In 1995, it was on the market for $10 million. In 1996, you bought it for $500,000. Now tell us about the historical, architectural significance of that, and then what that posed as a challenge.
Well, the challenge was it put us in a whole different league as far as real estate's concerned.
Well, let's add it 60 or 70% of your square footage, correct, at the time? You were about, what,
No, we were probably 6 million. That put us up to...
Okay, okay.
Then there's 2 million square feet up there now.
2 million, yeah.
Out of a total of 11 million altogether today.
Right.
But we were very much local individual buildings for the most part, and had no thought we would ever buy anything like that. Nor did he, except he got up there and saw it. The broker said the price was 10 million, but he had taken an offer for as little as 5 million. And it was a little embarrassing to walk in with an offer for 5 million to the owners, who were Black & Decker, the Black & Decker Corporation.
Right.
We talked about it quite a bit. Jamie convinced me to come up and look at it. It didn't take much convincing once I got there that we could make an offer and see what happened. Excuse me. And given the time that it was, there were issues of contamination on the property. People had stayed away from it. They were afraid of it.
Machine oil and things of that sort.
Oil, you know.
Destroying old machines, and a foundry. They had a foundry there.
They had a foundry as well. So there were things that would be natural in that kind of a facility. And we determined eventually that we would make an offer. The offer he made was $500,000. We never varied from that, and eventually we bought it found ourselves to be the owners for $500,000.
And now you've got an enormous project in front of you, which ultimately led to about $20 to $50 million worth of additional investment in order to bring it up to speed.
It was very much like the Big Dig.
Right.
I think we agreed that we would spend at least $17 million. We quickly got well beyond the $17 million. It was $27 million. It was $40 million, 50, 60, 70, $80 million.
But this fit the Cummings niche to a certain extent. You had built a reputation by that point of taking troubled properties, things that had warts on them, and turned them into vanilla but highly successful operations. This was just another one. But now you're at the pinnacle of real estate business. Jamie's at the pinnacle, the apex of his career, and tragedy strikes. He's 42 years old. He's in peak physical
consummate
condition.
Athlete.
Triathlon.
Ran the marathon that year.
Right.
Died of a heart attack.
Died of a heart attack at
While
42 years old. How did that impact you personally? How did it impact the operation? You had many friends here throughout. Also, I think 2,000 people came to the wake. How did you recover from that spiritually, emotionally, and the business?
Hard to talk about, obviously, but something that was devastating, more than I could ever imagined I would be affected by anything.
Yeah.
But we got through that, and with a whole lot of really good people here, and lots of support for and recovery, and have obviously gotten by it. Right. But it leaves a whole lot of good memories for the 17 and a half years we were together.
And certainly left a personal, personal home.
Yep.
So the shoe is on its way. Now you've got to come back into the business, and now let's switch over. Now you're back in the business. You're fixing up the shoe. You get the Northeast Trade Center. You're building up to 11 million square feet. And in '86, you had already established a foundation. You're transferring properties. I thought you had a great quote in there, which you dealt with the inheritance tax by deciding to give everything away. I thought that was an interesting quote.
Yep.
So you start that in 1986. What was your first big philanthropic endeavor? Was it the Boys Club again?
The first time we made any kind of a grant of $100,000 was the Woburn Boys Club, and Jamie and I presented that, and I think it went to the Charlie Gardner Endowment Fund, actually, which is still going.
And you've continued that commitment. I think I happened to be in an event the other night where you gave the third installment of $1 million to the Boys Club. So that's always been at the center of your giving. But in 2011, you did a very un-Bill Cummings-like thing, and you outed yourself as a billionaire, which people who live next door to you didn't know that. And you did that by joining the Giving Pledge. Explain to us what that is.
We accepted an invitation to join an organization that was founded by Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett.
Pretty august company.
It certainly is, and it was out of my league totally.
Well, I hope they said the same thing when Bill Cummings joined.
Joyce and I attended the first annual meeting of the Giving Pledge, and it was out in a remote resort in the Southwest. We got off our JetBlue flight and rented a budget rent-a-car and had a nice drive through the desert to get to this location. And the funny thing was, when we got to the reception desk at the resort, and the first thing they asked me is, "Hi, Mr. Cummings, nice to have you here. Could you give us your tail number, please?" I didn't know much about tail numbers in those days. Tail number is what you have, like the large majority of the people who were there had their own private planes, and they registered with their tail number.
Now that's more Cummings-like. You didn't have a limousine, you rented a car and drove over there.
No. We got inside, and I got to tell you, Phil, that at the time, looking around, the people who were there, and we knew a large percentage of them by
Reputation.
by reputation and by what we knew they looked like, and it felt for the first time in many years to feel that we were the poorest people in the room was an unusual feeling. It was very welcoming, however, and we've managed to fit in pretty well.
Been there every year, 7 years since. Now, what is the essence of it? The essence is you're going to give away 50% of your overall net worth, but you far exceeded that, haven't you not?
It was very easy for us to do that because we had already done it. Mm-hmm. At that point, all the buildings had been, well, not all, but a large majority of our buildings had been donated to the foundation, and that had accomplished it. Excuse me. But the essence of the club, it's not a club, it's an organization. The essence of that is to learn from each other about philanthropic methods, mm-hmm. and mistakes that are made, share mistakes, share successes.
Well, you haven't made any mistakes in this sense, that your foundation is rather unique in that, first of all, you donated a significant amount of securities, but you've also donated a huge amount of properties which will generate revenue in perpetuity. It's not possible really for you to give away the principal. Will this last in perpetuity in terms of what you see after Bill Cummings passes on? After
Bill and Joyce pass on, it will last as long as the guardians of it later cause that to happen.
Okay, and it's unique in a sense that you don't have any family members on making $2 million a year, and you don't have a large management structure. Almost 100% of all of the proceeds of this is for the endowment, is for the foundation. You have somewhere in the order of, 85 or 90 of your employees who are pro bono in the foundation?
Not quite that way, but all of the administrative work of the foundation is done pro bono by Cummings Properties. Cummings mm-hmm. Properties cannot charge anything for anything it does. We have a great many community volunteers, however, mm-hmm. who are actually making literally most of the grants are being made by community people. Mm-hmm. There's 78 or 80 of them, and they are actually making the grants. Mm-hmm. And it's so rewarding to see that happen. That's what will have to happen later.
Right, right. So you have a governance group in place now.
We have a board of trustees that is primarily non-family members. Mm-hmm. 2/3 of them have no relation, blood relation, or company relation.
Did you take all of the discretion of the giving out of your hands and give it to the foundation? Or
well,
are you still in play?
If the foundation wanted to gang up on me, it would control it all.
It would control it all.
Yeah, and that's the authority of a board of trustees. Mm-hmm. I don't think that will ever happen, but we don't have the votes to stop it. Mm-hmm. So that's so far
remarkable. So
we're pleased.
Let's talk about a number of them. The Cunard Hospital was one of your first big endeavors, right?
Yes, yes.
That was a $3.2 million purchase price, and then about a $6 million investment in turning that into a nonprofit, a nursing home, essentially, and assisted living.
The latter.
Assisted living.
Assisted and independent living.
And independent
There are
living.
110 or so residents.
Okay. Well, that was another niche play by Bill Cummings. That, you know, what are you going to do with this old hulk of a building that's still got part of the morgue in there and chemicals and all and records and everything else, and you were able to.
We had real body parts when we took it over that were still there. So it was just stopped being a hospital and
Just stopped doing it. Nobody took responsibility until Bill Cummings comes along.
And we converted it and had people living in it by the end of the same year. First
In the same year.
The same new residents started moving in on about August 16th.
Remarkable.
We passed papers in the first or so of January.
And that was another example of future buildability
Sure.
because you put supportive life on there as well.
We put there's a large enough piece of property that we donated it to Supportive Living Incorporated, which built a home for 15 people with severe head injuries.
Right. Now, that was kind of a tribute to Doug Stevens, the late Doug Stevens, who was your CFO here for many years.
He was
a
with
fellow
me.
Fraternity brother at
He
Tufts.
was a fellow fraternity brother. He was there even at Old Medford days and stayed all the way through. And,
Right.
and that was an organization that he and his wife developed.
Right.
And it was very nice to be able to do that, certainly.
As he had a son who had a tragic accident.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Okay, so now we go to Marlborough and you replicate the whole thing all over again. This time with a large property from the archdiocese. It was a school, right, within the archdiocese?
It was a school within the archdiocese, actually owned by the Sisters of the Good Shepherd.
That's right. Okay.
We acquired that 23 years ago and have close to 400 residents out there today.
Right.
And it works very nicely. It's
Amazing.
No.
Another one in honor of Doug was the YMCA in Beverly. That was another contribution from the foundation.
The foundation built a remote building in Beverly, a teen center, named the Douglas Stevens Teen Center in Beverly. That's worked out very well.
Now, in the last, there's a list of companies that are the largest foundation givers it's not the philanthropic givers in the state, people and companies, and Cummings Foundation leads that list of a very impressive group of people. In the last 3 years, I think you've given out $50 million in 14, $38 million in 15. With more to come. One of the big ones that you're involved in now is the Butaro Ambulatory Cancer Center in Rwanda.
We took a big leap there, didn't we?
A big leap. How is it that you've left Middlesex County or even the Burlington, Stone and Burlington, Stone and Woburn area, and now you find yourself in Rwanda?
The foundation has actually made total grants of about $230 or $40 million now, including a major grant to establish a new University of Global Health Equity in Rwanda.
Right.
First of all, we built we built a cancer clinic, outpatient cancer clinic in Rwanda, working with Partners in Health. That's Dr. Paul Farmer.
Right.
And we've been so extraordinarily impressed with him.
Right.
And
Now, my eyesight is getting bad because I skipped over your first really enormous venture, which was the Tufts Veterinary School. I think that was a $40 million donation to that, and you were also involved in actually the management of it.
Not directly involved in the management. We're involved in the management, certainly, of the assisted living communities.
Weren't you on the board of trustees, though, involved in that?
I was very involved in the trustees at Tufts. As a Tufts trustee, a charter trustee for 10 years, but not directly managing the
Veterinary.
what is now the Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine. But it's we have a close contact with them, certainly, and so much respect the work that they do there.
Now, was that a result of your affinity for animals and the veterinary care, or was that a connection to an affinity for Tufts?
Well,
or a combination of both?
I hope everybody has an affinity and a love of animals because they're so important for so many of us. It really was more a question of whether it had a need, and it didn't need any special love. There was a need there, and we were able to come along at the right time
And fill in
and
it,
help
certainly.
out. You know.
Now, one of the ones that really intrigues me is this program that you have called 100K for 100. And that's a $10 million grant program on an annual basis. Tell us how that works.
That's one of the things that is managed primarily by our volunteers. It's now has a different name, and it's a $25 million program to invest in not-for-profit activities within these 3 counties. And I think the 100 for 100 portion of it is the way that organizations get started, and then thereafter we've got another $15 million a year now that is granted to allow them to continue on an ongoing basis without the full application process.
Right. I think in Burlington we've gained a couple. One I think is in mental health policing and the police department dealing with mental health issues.
Yeah.
Since they're the first responders in most of these domestic cases, which mental health may be an issue. So you're focusing on certain aspects of community life through these nonprofits.
We're focusing really on anything that's local. These are all the 95% of what we do is to organizations that most of us would have no idea what they did. They're out of sight. They're small organizations, and we're trying to recognize with the community volunteers, we're trying to recognize the organizations which otherwise wouldn't get funded by big national funders.
Right.
So by doing it locally and having a wide network of people from the community. You mentioned Burlington Police Department. I think they've had $200,000 awards and separated by some years. And we've certainly invested in a few other police activities, a lot with mental health, a lot with charter school type things, a lot with recidivism programs to keep people from going back into prison, especially if they've been out, programs to help underserved communities bring their high school graduates to a higher level when they've been accepted to college, so that they perform better once they get there.
So these organizations that at the community level, at the human services level, that generally are scuffling around trying to find funding, trying to stretch their budgets, and your organization is there for essentially hands-free and no strings attached in terms of achieving their goals.
Yeah, remember that just like in a college or university, the principal, the president of the school or the organization very often is going to do the large majority of the fundraising. But if you're a small organization and the president the leaders are spending all their time on fundraising, that takes them away from actually providing the services that they're there for.
Right. The mission statement becomes fundraising as opposed to service.
So if we can take a chunk of that away and give them a predictable amount on an annual basis so they know they have that, and it's not what if at the end of the year, that makes a huge difference. So that's our standard there.
Wow, well that seems like that would make such a dramatic impact across the region. Now, let's move on to another area of your expertise, your experience, and talk about the current real estate market, the current real estate environment. Henry Davidovitz, a noted national analyst in the retail segment, has said that he envisions in the next 5 years that 40 to 50% of the retail malls in the United States will be closing. What do you see happening?
It's kind of scary, isn't it?
It is kind of scary. It is. Well, it's scary for a number of reasons, certainly from an employment reason, but also from a value reason that relates to community property taxes and sustaining community budgets. So what do you see? What do you see happening in our locale, what are the solutions, if there are any? Does Amazon need to be broken up? Does there need to be a change of use in thinking? Do we become residential retail cities? I mean, what is Bill Cummings' answers?
Wouldn't it be more a question of towns recognizing that there's some danger and maybe paying a little attention to what do they do if that happens, and organizing zoning regulations to allow better uses, of newer uses of those properties?
Right.
And one of the biggest ones right now is residential housing adjacent to mall areas, or maybe
Right.
incorporated within them, and adjacent as well to good transportation.
Right.
So you cut down the number of people who are driving somewhere they can, and converting buildings like that. So they
But
have
isn't it
housing.
incumbent upon people like you bringing that proposal in to affecting that change? I'll give you a perfect example. Simon's Properties Group, which you would think, they're the largest, one of the largest retail REITs in the country. They own the Burlington Mall, certainly a successful mall, but Sears as an anchor has gone out of there. And rather than bring in the type of city retail residential proposal that might sustain the value, they're coming in really with the same old. More restaurants, more liquor licenses, more boutique retail shops. And you and I both know that, restaurants, they have one of the highest failure rates of any startup business.
Absolutely.
So doesn't the
We know
industry...
it firsthand, as you know.
Yeah, I'm sure. Isn't it incumbent upon the thinkers in the business to be bringing these things forward?
Well, it's probably more incumbent upon the thinkers who are in that business than it is in our business. We don't have retail space to speak of. We get very, very little of it.
Yeah, but you've got mixed use, right? You always advocated having mixed use, I think, in the first floor and as an accoutrement to the office space.
Absolutely. And now it's a question of bringing, instead of bringing the accoutrement facilities to the office park, it's a question of bringing the people to the office park, and maybe making some use of some of the acreage that is going to be, in all probability, not needed.
So you think that's the answer then, to sustain values is added residential?
Gee, I can't pose myself as an expert in any way on that side, because I don't deal with it.
No.
But that's my amateurish.
Yeah.
Thought
Even though
about it,
your
though.
niche is to is to rehabilitate things that have gone wrong over the last 30 years. Right?
Sure.
You don't give yourself credit for as being an idea man.
I probably give myself a lot of credit for being an idea person, but not necessarily as how to reposition retail property, though.
Okay. Fruit juice, ice cream, boats.
All of those things.
All those things. Okay. Now, how about the economy in general? The taxes just had a big tax cut in January. How is that affecting the corporate clientele? Do you see an upturn in business? Do you see more spending in terms of expansion in your area of expertise?
I think for the last 3 years, there's been a marked turnaround in confidence level of the businesses that we work with, which we work. Altogether, there are 2,300 probably different, specifically independent client firms, and the market, the large percentage of our annual growth is with existing firms who are doing well. We try to provide good services on a regular basis, treat our clients well. We recognize, just as we have a large group of 20-year employees, we've got a group of client firms. There's 130 or 40 client firms, maybe not quite that many, but that kind of a number, who have been with us for 20 or more years. We're in West Cummings Park here now. There's a park, what we call Park in the Park, behind 200 West Cummings Park, and between there and 500, is dedicated to Zizitsky Sales. There's a nice plaque out there that recognizes that they're 42 years as a continuous client. They're the dean of our client firms.
42 years.
George Holland is the dean of our staff. You know, and the two things are so important. You know, the people to take care of the properties and the people to occupy them.
Now, I got two last questions, actually. One is, you adapted early on to the technology of the business, did you not? In terms of, you know, CAD/CAM for layouts for buildings, your advertising was...
I was dragged into it kicking and screaming by people who knew more about it than I did. Yes.
But you have been in the forefront, the vanguard of that type of technology transition, have you not?
We have. We've done a lot of things very, very early on. We've done a lot of things which other firms have emulated in a bunch of different ways, and are pleased with that. And that would just, you know, support the theory of making sure that everyone has a voice. So the people in an organization, if they're listened to, if their opinions are valued and given credence and credit, you know, people want to help their company. And if we try to incorporate a feeling of belonging, that's just so important in employee relations.
And that's included, you have a collectivist management style in terms of seeking everybody's opinion, and the manager who's responsible for that segment, you rely on his final decision or her final decision.
Yeah, well, and we use something called an 80% solution, and encourage people, if there's a basic idea and a question, or there's a problem and somebody comes up with the answer, don't look at that answer and say, well, that's it. And don't be afraid if somebody else wants to come in and say, what if we did it this way? Would that be a little, yeah, that would be a little better. Somebody else said, but why don't we do this first and go that way? And it gets even better. So most of the time, the first answer is not the best answer. And that's been kind of a hallmark of what we do around here.
You have a quote, again, this is a business book, and I think you say that this is one of the cornerstones really of success in business. Precise writing, strong negotiating, and ever-present frugality. Are those the cornerstones of your business philosophy?
They certainly are the main ones in every respect.
Now,
Integrity is probably the one that should be right in there with them, though, that we preach that all the time.
And one last question. In order to work at Cummings Properties, you have to take a test. You have to take a 2-page reading and writing test. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a comprehension and writing test. And we call it an exercise. People don't like to think they're being tested. But
it's an exercise.
we ask everyone to complete, everyone who's in a role where his or her position would involve writing. This doesn't apply into field positions for trades positions, but anyone whose career will be better if he or she can write, we like to make sure we at least know we have them when they come on. And so we do a writing exercise we've been doing it for 45 years. 33 in a two-page letter. I think there are 3 grammatical or usage errors in which they're challenged to correct. How effective has it been? It's extremely effective. We've got the big thing there is that if people are putting agreements onto a piece of paper, there are so many variations of what they could say, and they can say it just right, or they can do it sloppily.
Right.
And we want it to be right so it accurately reflects whatever the agreement is with whoever we're negotiating with.
With clarity.
Sure. It's only fair.
Okay. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I'd like to thank our guest, Bill Cummings. Thank you, Bill, for your time. The book is Starting Small and Making It Big, An Entrepreneur's Journey to a Billion-Dollar Philanthropist. It's available on Amazon. It's available from Cummings Properties and Cummings Foundation. They're at 200 Cummings Properties.
200 West Cummings Park.
200 West Cummings Park.
The book access is right at cummingsproperties.com/book.
It's /book, and you can drive over here, I guess, and buy one too, as well as get it on Amazon. Buy them by the case even. Buy them by the case.
Distribute them to all their customers.
It's new out in March, and it's in its second printing, and one of the interesting things...
Let me correct you. It's now in the fourth printing, and we have 10,000 copies that have been sold. So.
Great, wonderful. And one of the interesting things about it is if you look on the title page, you'll find there's no ghostwriter, no editor. The words that you read here are Bill Cummings' own, front to back. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Great pleasure.